Is how is this, well, they don't call it an embargo, but it is in all but name, hitting your bottom line?
Well, these are changing times and challenging times. Qatar proved to be resilient. You did mention that 30% reserves. The total reserves is $340 billion. That is the sovereign funds. In addition, we have central bank with cash and gold, $40 billion. So essentially 30% reduction, which you mentioned, is confined to only central bank reserves to improve the local market liquidity. So the GDP and versus reserves, if you look at it, twice as GDP is their reserves. So in terms of financial stability, it is strong and stable and functional. And the challenges remains in terms of alternate supplies and the airport or seaport or road. The alternate supplies has been sought, and essentially Plan A to Plan B is a conversion which they are engaged in. The operational research proved to be a right model, and it is working well. Except the food price inflation, the rest are all under control. Qatar's recurring revenues in terms of oil, gas, and petrochemicals is in the making. That's long-term supply chain, and essentially the roadblock is not there in real order. And that's what everyone has to understand. International community is recognizing in terms of political progression, social progression, and economic progression, Qatar seems to be a resilient and model economy.
Right. But is it hurting? You know, this is only 2 months into it, but will it hurt, I should say, in, let's say, 6 months to a year from now if this state of affairs continues?
Well, it will have its own consequential impact in terms of realignment, in terms of business modeling. As I said, they have to necessarily rework on the dynamics of food price inflation. That's a medium-term process. Supply chain disruptions in terms of land transport has caused some disturbance, but there is always Plan B. The transshipment, now the hub is moved from Jebel Ali to Sohar. Imports from Saudi Arabia has been redefined to Turkey and Malaysia and India and UK. So essentially, reordering the levels is one thing which they have to consider, and also they have to necessarily realign the overall policy framework, which is in concerns with the rest of the world. In terms of political progression, social justice, freedom, and functional democracy is what Qatar is embarked on over the last 20 years. And that's been miscalculated by the neighbors. That's what the trigger is all about. Essentially, in terms of economic stability, social progression, and the political progression, Qatar's convergence is visible. The rest of the world is trying to understand in total terms.
Well, tell me something, Raghavan, then. Do you expect this crisis to be sorted out anytime soon?
It's lingering. Essentially, America is playing its part. And Kuwait is doing a substantive role in bringing the mediation. GCC is known for cooperation and coordination over the last 40 years. And the United Nations has to step in to see how best they can peacefully resolve this. It's required. It's time. It's a defining time to make sure that the Qatar's role has been recognized, and the rest of the Gulf states is known for cooperation. As I said, they come to terms with brothers. So it has to be resolved by international mediations. That's efforts is on, and stepping in from United Nations will have a long-term positive consequences.
Does this mark the beginning of the end of the GCC?
Well, I hope not. The GCC customs unions have worked well. Currency union has been set in as a good convergence criteria, though it is not implemented. The macroeconomic similarity within the Gulf states have been well established. 45% of the oil, 20-25% of the world gas comes in. The geopolitical frameworks getting redefined time and again. The overall, the bigger picture is GCC stands united, everyone stands to gain. If it is getting divided, everyone stands to lose. And that's what the policymakers have to recognize and come to terms in consonance with the overall universal benchmarks.
What will it do to Qatar and its outlook, the sovereign wealth fund, of course, which has been so acquisitive? Do you expect the country to look more inwardly now?
they are redefining. The internal integration is very much visible now. There is a new regeneration in terms of patriotism, investments in the local market, and essentially cooperation with other Gulf states is also blossoming well. And sovereign funds is a diversification, is a structured solutions to have long-term diversification prophecy. And they have to necessarily modernize the internal infrastructure, which they are going to do, and they are doing it. And more inward integrations will take place to lift the overall infrastructure, healthcare, educations, and FIFA 2022 is shaping up. So plenty of opportunities to invest within Qatar as well and enrich the standard of living and the common man.
Now, looking at this from a geopolitical point of view, does this also perhaps mean that Qatar actually becomes closer to Iran and not more distant to it? After all, Qatar and Iran do share the world's largest gas field.
You can't avoid your neighbors, right? Geography is fixed in global order. Essentially, the transactions which are prejudicial to the universal framework, Patriot Act or Iran sanctions, have not been violated by Qatar. I can tell you as a banker. There are established framework, well-defined, and whether it is OFAC or United Nations Security Council, resolutions have been respected. Now, neighbor is a neighbor, and you have to respect the sentiments. That's what Qatar was trying to be in consonance. But in terms of compliance and substantive compliance, Qatar always fulfilled its obligations as a statesman. In terms of financial services, there are no breach of regulations whatsoever over the years.
What does it mean in terms of looking at, I think you've alluded to some of this, that actually Qatar is more likely now also to become friendly with other Arab countries that it didn't have great relations with before?
Well, the political realignment is a policymaker's discretion as such. From economic point of view, I can tell you, the Iran, as you rightly said, we are sharing the gas fields. That's known, and there is no breach of regulation in terms of Iranian sanction when Americans have set in right from 2011 onwards. So whether there will be a supply chain support comes from when there is a disruption from Saudi Arabia, there were emergency medical supplies or food supplies were triggered. Those are humanitarian values. Essentially, rest of the realignment, time will prove.
Just on a very lighter note here, Raghavan, is this the right time for Qatar to be flogging, or should I say spending $260 million on the footballer Neymar in his transfer from Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain?
Well, Qatar brand equity in terms of World Cup is evolving to be a fine combination. They have invested in Barcelona. So essentially, the contractual obligations, I'm not sure how it gets resolved. And they will be fair and just in whatever be the long-term objectives in terms of putting the brand equity for Qatar as a sports tourism city, country, and essentially we are ready to host 2022. Everything will be aligning with those principle-centered values.